Before we call the meeting to order, it's a special budget meeting for the Committee of the Whole and Committee of Finance and Property. So I'll read what I have to read. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Beverly City Council, Committee of the Whole, and Committee on the Finance and Property will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with the right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the City of Beverly's website, www.beverlyma.gov/events/category/city meetings. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch and listen to the meeting may do so in the following manner: tuning in to BevCam on channel 99 or watching BevCam's YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/BevCamTV, and clicking into the BevCam government channel. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the City of Beverly's website an audio or video recording transcript and or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. We don't have to read about public participation because there is no public participation, nor do we have to read about City Council Rule number 22 because we aren't taking any votes. With that said, I will ask Councilor Tim Flaherty to call to order the Committee on Finance and Property.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to call to order Finance and Property.
And I will call to order the Committee of the Whole. So for tonight's special budget hearing, we'll hear from two people. First, we'll hear from Dr. Sue Chirocek of the Beverly Public Schools. She'll talk about the Beverly Public Schools budget document. And then later in the evening, we have Michael Collins, and he will talk about public services and engineering. And with Mr. Ailes, and I know that Gloria Bouillon will be on from the airport, we'll talk about the enterprise funds. So Dr. Chirocek, you're first on our agenda tonight. Thank you for being here.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. And in addition, before I begin, I also want to just take an opportunity, if I could, to thank all of you for all of your support during these sort of unprecedented times that we've been living through in the last few months. I'm really grateful to work in a community that understands and values one another and the work that we do together. When we closed schools on March 13th, I think that the municipal leaders, the mayor's office, the city council, the school committee, the first thing that came to mind to all of you was, how can we help? And we really, really appreciated the help that we got from all of you. I don't think we could have made it through the initial beginning times and through the last 3 months without all of you. So I just wanted to, from the schools and from the students and for our families, want to thank you all for everything that you've done to help us through those times. So that's really it's been a really great opportunity to work with all of you. So I appreciate that. But tonight I'm here to present the proposed FY21 budget. I am going to ask if I can share my screen, if that's okay.
Of course.
I have a slide presentation to kind of share with all of you.
It'll be much easier than trying to look at it on my phone.
There you go. There you go. Sorry, that's my grandson calling me. Doesn't know I'm in city council right now. All right, well, thank you. So, I want to also let you know that within the challenges of uncertainty, that's not the one that I wanted to share. Hold on. Are you all seeing what I'm seeing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold on. My grandson, there we go. All right. He's going to be 2 on Saturday, just so you know. It was a good phone call to miss. While we don't know what the schools are going to really look like in September, I wanted to kind of preface that tonight we're here to present the budget And the budget that we're presenting is really predicated on a brick and mortar model, which means sort of live presentation. We have not yet received our guidance or direction on exactly what schools will look like. We needed to move forward with something. What you'll see here is really a level serviced budget. So as I walk you through, I wanted to keep that in mind. I know there are a lot of questions and uncertainties about what schools will look like and what we will be actually doing. And we will know more about that in the coming weeks. But we've done our best to present a budget that represents what we think we would need to do in the coming year. So like we begin all of our budget conversations and pretty much all of our conversations within the school district, we always want to start with the school district goal areas. They're really important for us that what we do in our schools always link back to what we have identified as important and what we want to accentuate in all the work that we do. A budget really needs to represent the goals, and the goals really need to be represented in the budget. So we have our 4 goal areas. I think that some of you have seen these before. But in particular, we focus on engaged learning. We think that it's really an important feature for all of us to think about making sure that we're providing equal access for all of our students, both in terms of social emotional learning, as well as in the area of inclusive practices. So those are 2 areas that we have devoted a lot of time and energy, and our staffing patterns are predicated on moving those goals forward. We are committed to a rigorous and consistent curriculum, really looking at how we provide instruction and making sure that it doesn't matter which elementary school you go to or which teacher that you have in either the middle or the high school, that our curriculum is consistent both vertically and horizontally, and that we provide it at a very high level of expectation. We've made a deep commitment to innovative practices. Our innovative practices really lead to deeper learning. We think about in terms of authentic learning opportunities, project-based learning, and making sure that we're making connections and engagement for students at a level that makes sense for them. And then always with an eye to strong school management practices. So taking a responsible and efficient approach to everything that we do. So those are our goal areas. We keep them in mind with everything that we do. And so I wanted to make sure that you had those in mind as we move through the budget. When we were creating the budget this year, there were obviously some factors. There's always factors that impact the budget. In FY21, there are some pretty significant factors that I'm sure that you're all aware of. The first one, the current economic conditions and the COVID-19 pandemic that we've been experiencing leaves us in a real uncertain area around what our budget will be able to withstand and what we'll be able to do, and even how we'll be delivering services and instruction and education to students in September. I'm not going to go too deep into those. I know that Brian has presented to you, and you've been reviewing budgets for the past few nights this week, so you're all very aware of the situation that we're facing. For the schools in particular, we have some contractual obligations that impact how we create our budget. We are currently in negotiations with all 6 of our units. We have begun, and we are in the midst of negotiations with Unit A, which are the teachers, and we have 5 other units that we will be opening conversations with as we go forward. Before we even have a determination of a COLA for our units, we are obligated in the contracts that we currently have for steps and lanes, and that's what we call in the schools. The steps represent the number of years that you've worked in our district, and lanes represent the amount of education that you have. So depending on the amount of postgraduate credits that you've accumulated, you move over lanes. We are already obligated within the current staffing that we have for $514,000 in our steps and $180,000 in our lanes. Brian has provided us with an estimate of healthcare increase at 1.5%, and that comes in at $227,000. The final thing that we have not finished our negotiations with is the COLA. I have put this up here for a benchmark for all of you to know what, in fact, it would mean. A 1% increase for our employees right now would be $443,310. So that's just to keep in mind, to let you know sort of where we are and where we stand. you can kind of it's a kind of an easy number, kind of easy math. If we were to go to 1.25, it would be 555, and so on as we go up the list. So that's what our contractual obligations are to our units. And as I said, we'll be in negotiations with them through the summer. The other area that's really impacting the creation of this budget is enrollments. There are one or two situations across the North Shore that we're in. We have several districts surrounding us that are decreasing enrollments. We are not in that situation. We have increasing enrollments across all of our school and across all of our grade levels. So I wanted to share with you tonight a historical look just over the last 3 years of where we stand in terms of students that are enrolling in our schools. It's pretty clear. FY19 in our elementary schools, which is K through 4, we had 1,798 students. We are estimating that in FY21, in those same grades, K through 4, we will have about 1,900 students. So that's an increase for us over 2 years, and insignificant increase for our elementary enrollments. We actually take this as a matter of pride. We think that it's a really good thing that students in the families in Beverly want to send their children to our public schools, and we do our best to kind of make sure we keep that heading in that direction. So in our middle school, we have the same thing, increasing enrollments, although not quite so drastic. But one of the things that's significant in middle school is the shifting. So sometimes we have grade levels where we have a lot of kids and the numbers are really high. If you notice in FY19, our grade 5 enrollment was at 398. And that number, as it transitioned over to FY20 and now into FY21, shifts down a grade level. But the significance is that we have a 2-person team model in grades 5 and 6, and we have a 4-person or 5-person, if you include foreign language, model in grade 7. So that causes shifts in our staffing patterns as we go through, and you'll understand that better when I get into a few future slides about areas that we were able to eliminate positions and areas where we're forced to add positions. But in general, you've seen an increase of about 60 students over the last 2 years in our middle school. And then finally, our high school, and you'll see our high school enrollment has grown as well, got up 60 and then 40, so up almost 100 students over the last 2 years. And again, there's shifting of the grade level of enrollments, and that impacts the scheduling and the content areas that we have to provide for students as we go through. Overall, you have a district total from 4,468 in FY19 up to 4,726. So we are growing. We're very proud of our schools, and we're happy that students are coming there. But that's some of the factors that do impact the way that we had to create the budget as we go forward. We also have our preschool enrollments that we have been watching. Preschool tends to have more fluctuations. And as many of you know, our preschool is predominantly designed to serve some of the students ages 3 to 5 in our district who are identified with special needs. And so we have an integrated preschool where peers are able to come under a tuition model, and students with special needs that are identified and that need the services are enrolled in our preschool. So our preschool numbers are anticipated in FY21 to be 135 students. That's really high. And in addition of those students, a good number of our newly enrolled preschool students will be students that require some significant services as they're on the autism spectrum. So you'll see that impacted as well. And then finally, and this is a huge cause for celebration. I know Ms. Slansky's watching somewhere. I think she's in the YouTube land watching us, but the decrease in out-of-district placements that we've had since FY19, that is a significant accomplishment on the part of our special education department, our regular ed teachers, and all of our administrators who have worked really, really hard to keep our Beverly students in Beverly rather than out of district. There is a cost savings for us as we go, which is one of the reasons we were probably able to make this budget work as well as we have been able to. However, I do want to make sure that everyone understands that while we save money from sending students out of district, we still have to spend some of that money within district to maintain programming so that they're successful when we bring them back, so that they're not just U-turning and heading right on out of district after that. But this is a huge accomplishment for our schools, and another thing that has an impact on our budget. Based upon those enrollment numbers that you just saw, we have some staffing changes. In pre-K through 4, we are required to increase a preschool teacher, and that would be, in this case, an intensive preschool teacher, which means that it's a teacher that is teaching students that have some significant disabilities, and so that would be a self-contained program. It's one of the programs in one of the areas that we have really become accomplished in that is keeping our students in district instead of out of district. We have an increase in, I think I'm going to go back a little bit. If we go to this first, I didn't accentuate it here, but if you look at our first grade enrollments for FY21, we have 436, which is an extremely large number of first graders in our elementary schools. And that large number of students in elementary schools is predicating an increase of two different buildings, a grade 1 classroom. So at the Cove School, we're increasing a grade 1 teacher, and at the Hannah School, we're increasing a grade 1 teacher. But conversely, like all of the other departments in the city, we've been looking really closely at what we have going on in our schools and where could we find places that we could make some changes in the staffing and save some money. And so this was done. These are not positions or teachers that were cut. These are shifts that we've made. So none of the teachers were displaced, but rather we utilized either attrition or openings in other grade levels to move some teachers around. So there'll be, instead of four grade classes at Ayers, there'll be 3. Same thing, grade 3 at Cove is down a 3rd grade. Hannah is decreased by, it's actually a 0.5. Because we will be having full day kindergarten for everyone next year. That half day kindergarten position has been, we've been able to decrease. And then finally, grade 1 at North Beverly is decreased by 1 section. When we were talking about the enrollments at the middle school, I mentioned the shifting of grade levels of the larger cohorts of classes. So next year in grade 5, we are able to reduce 1 position. Again, not teachers losing their jobs, but rather attrition and other reallocating of the resources, as well as 2 in grade 6. That's just a difference between having 400 students and 350 students. And then, however, that requires us to increase a grade 7 position, as well as we shifted one of those to increase the academic support in grade 7 and 8 for our Success Academy, and we increased a Learning Center support teacher in grade 7 by 1 position. Again, that's all driven by enrollments that we have and the shifting of the large cohort. And then finally, we're increasing middle school global apps, which is used to call them electives or specials, by 2 positions. That's been an area that we have struggled with since we opened the middle school. We have been working really hard to identify the areas where we might need more teachers. I believe that in this, they're looking at an art teacher and maybe a STEM teacher. I have to be clear, but it's 2 global app positions for the middle school population. And then finally at the high school, again, due to enrollment, we need to increase ELL by 1 position. We only have 1 ELL teacher in the high school, and the number of ELL students that we have enrolled really requires us to add in that area. If you, much of the guidance around ELL and ELL services, particularly at the high school level, if you come into a high school and you're learning a new language and trying to master the core academics of a high school, it's a really difficult challenge. So we're proposing an increase of 1 position there. In terms of the, I'll kind of go back to help you visualize this. If you look at the high school, the shift in enrollment moves from freshman and sophomore year to sophomore and junior year. And so that really causes a strain on the schedule and our ability to provide what we need to do. And so Mrs. Taylor, in looking at what areas she really needed more staffing in, identified social studies by 1 position and business and technology robotics by 1 position. And then finally, we're proposing a 1 position academic support for the Beacon program. The Beacon program is a program that we have, it's going into its 3rd year, I believe, where we have identified students with significant mental health and or anxiety, social emotional needs, This is a program that helps them transition either out of a hospitalization or helps maybe prevent hospitalization for some of our students. It's really important, and we are really sure that going into the new year, that's going to be an area that we need to be providing supports for students in. So in terms of positions, that's where we are. When we went through and looked at our appropriated budget, our original proposal for appropriated budget was a level serviced, which was taking the FY20 budget, and we had requested 1.5 million in additional appropriation. However, that is what the budget book that we distributed to you all was predicated on. So you may have noticed the budget book was built on a 62 517 942. However, after we had gone to print and before we presented, we had another meeting with the mayor and Bryant, and it was really determined that 1.4 million was really the number that we were going to be able to receive from the city. At that point in time, we made some adjustments, and we are now at 62 417 942. And so that is the budget that I'm coming forward with you tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions or
Thank you, Dr. Director. Before we go to questions from members of the City Council, I have to recognize the school committee is here. Our president, Rachel A. Bell, is here. Lorinda Visnick, Kelly Ferretti, Karen Robinson, John Mulady, the mayor, who was on the school committee, is here also, as well as Kimberly Coelho. Jean Sherbourne is here also, the school's business manager. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Chirocek? Council Flowers.
Thank you very much, President Guanci, and thank you, Dr. Chirocek, for presenting that to us and helping us kind of understand where you're going, especially at this time. I think you're right to say it's unprecedented. I feel like for schools particularly, it looks to me like September and beyond feels very still uncharted. And I know that you and your team are doing your best to try to estimate what will happen and what will be needed. I'm wondering, I actually feel like I heard you touch on some of it when you talked about the ELL position, but I wondered if you could explain a little bit about how I recognize that not all, and this will be a hard year for that because the increased funding from the Student Opportunity Act may not be able to come from the state in the way that we had hoped. But are there goals from that, goals that you and your team are working on that can still be addressed even with a level funded budget that you feel positively about? Can you help us sort of understand that?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I within some of the positions that we worked really hard to maintain, we had both of the positions in the middle school, the student support program, and the high school beacon program. Those we had really felt like social emotional learning was a really important part of what we wanted to address within the Student Opportunity Act when we had made the proposal. And we believe that it's really important for those programs to be successful. We think that they really were helpful in keeping students in school and engaged. And one component that was missing for our students was sort of the academic side of that. So it's one thing to kind of be settled and comfortable to come to school, but then when we get through there, how do we bridge back into the connection to the regular curriculum? And how do we get you back into the classroom? And so those two positions really are key. And they were originally in the Student Opportunity Act, we utilized the shifting enrollments in 5th and 6th grade to be able to capture a position back for the middle school, and we realized a retirement in the high school that we were able to kind of capitalize on. And so that was one. And then the second is the ELL position. One of the huge principles behind some of the Student Opportunity Act is to look at the vulnerable populations that we have and how do we support them. And we really do acknowledge that it is very difficult to learn a second language in the secondary level of our American school system, right? So being able to provide some more support and hopefully engage and be able to provide some success for students that for whom English is, their second language. So those three positions in particular were areas that we focused on that we felt were really important.
Thank you. President Guanci, may I ask one follow-up to that?
Of course.
Thank you. Dr. Trocheck, thank you for that. That's really helpful. I wonder if you also, I think it's in here, and I'm just wondering if you can point it to me. The After Dark program, I think I'm using the right name. It's the partnership. Is that something that is in this budget, and will that be moving forward?
Yes, it is. It is still in there. We worked very closely with Essex Tech. We have 22 students who will be enrolling in the After Dark program as rising juniors. We were able to work with Essex Tech. We kind of spent a little time working hard. It was originally going to be $120,000. We've got it down to $80,000, which we were really happy about. But that money is included in the budget. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Council Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question about school choice. Can you touch upon that a little bit of the numbers going in and out? It seems to have gone in our favor in the past few years, and that helps us budgetarily as well. But can you kind of go into that a little bit and explain that, how we've done and what we're looking forward to?
Yeah. So each year the school committee votes and decides how many seats to open. We have the way that we do it right now is we accept 10 school choice students from K to 8 and 15 from 9 to 12. I think, and I don't, Mrs. Bergeron may not be on the call, but I think we're down to maybe only having 3 or 4 open seats in random grade levels as we go along. We have utilized all those seats. What happens is students apply to be considered for school choice in Beverly, and those applications are due before May 1st. We hold a lottery, and we had a very hefty lottery, so we have to choose out of a lottery who gets offered the seats, and those seats are only assigned if we have space or room. So for example, if we had a school choice request for grade 3 in a particular building, but those had the class sizes were relatively high, we might accept them as a school choice student, but we would send them to a different building. And then in grades 5 through 12, once you're all in one building, you're able to kind of distribute students across neighborhoods and classrooms. So mitigates the kind of crowding in the classrooms. And right now we are full. We have a full house in terms of school choice.
Question, Mr. President. We are struggling here. Pandemic and the money, and we see percent of all new money going to the schools, and we feel pretty good about it. But as we move into the next fiscal year, we see as a total city that we're going to be struggling more than we are right now. And you kind of help me and with the school committee deliberations about how we move forward and how we can sustain intact, and how we go about that, do you think? That's a difficult question, but
and you were breaking up a little bit. I think I got the essence of what you were asking, though. I think I think we're always at all times taking a look at how we are allocating resources, and in this year in particular, we spent a lot of time talking about how could we reallocate those resources. So in education, there's always new things to do and new ideas, and people want you to try new things, but it doesn't do you any good to continue to fund things that are old, that no longer need to be done. So we really look at trying to make sure when we bring something new in, are we replacing something that we no longer have to fund, taking a look at how we allocate our resources, how do we utilize them across the district, how will consistency and cohesiveness vertically and horizontally in our curriculum support some of those savings that we can possibly make? How can we make sure that we're utilizing the best efficiencies that we can find? And, we're doing that on a regular basis. I do think that, and I understand that the school is a large part of the municipal budget, but we're also the largest employer. We have a growing enrollment. We have a lot of things that we're trying to make sure that we're managing and taking care of as we go along. And I think that often we're faced with some very significant needs that we're filling. The schools are being asked more and more to fill a lot of needs for the community in a lot of different ways. And so we're doing our best to kind of balance all of those out as best that we can. So I hope that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Flaherty. Council Frades.
Thanks so much, Dr. Trocheck. I just wanted to thank you for the one-on-one tutorials or meetings that were done in a formal session, because although I've known you informally for a long time, that was great to see where you're trying to take the district, and it was important for me to get a better understanding. So thank you for that, and I hope as we approach a new normal that we can go back to things like that. The second point I wanted to make is the Zoom sessions. I'm observing my own grandchildren, as you just took a phone call from yours, first and third grade, who are, it's amazing to me to watch their technology skills and the way they're learning, and the adaptability is just remarkable. And as we all do, we're out walking the neighborhoods, and one conversation struck me with a 7th grade parent up the street here at the middle school. The young man was floundering, but in the Zoom sessions, he's excelling. Can't wait to finish his assignments, finishing it in a day when it could take all week, and the parents are just stunned and amazed. So my point is, maybe there is some tremendous merit to this that could be continued after the pandemic is over. The last point I want to make is, Jerry Perry, our budget analyst, has been talking about how very fortunate we all are being in this situation financially, and some of the things that we took together collectively. And in a Zoom session with our fellow BC classmates, one of the women who is a teacher, a special ed teacher down in Plymouth, which is about twice the size of the district of Beverly, they have a massive shortfall, and their entire department was laid off. Make a long story short, because she had the magic number of 60 up to her age, she was just given a legal letter. Her last day is Monday, and permanently furloughed. So we in Beverly, I think, have to be thinking about that, how wonderfully fortunate we are to be in this position. But then again, if we're all on the Titanic together and we happen just to be in first class and some folks are in steerage, eventually, if we're not careful, it will come and get all of us. So that's a long-winded thing to say. Thank you for everything that you guys are doing.
Yeah, thank you. I would point out that what you've seen with your grandchild and the technology, that actually there was a sort of a silver lining to some of this in some respects. Our teachers, who are amazing and were amazing before, know more now and have been introduced to many more ways to provide services, to provide education, to open up opportunities. And so we will be capitalizing on those. We will never go. I think education has been changed forever for all of us in many ways, but one of the most significant is the understanding of leveraging technology as a tool rather than just as a device, and the understanding that, if we use it properly and if we use it well, then we can have an amazing impact on how we deliver services and instruction. So that's really important. And I echo what you say. I feel very fortunate to be in Beverly. I think that all of you and the responsible approach that the city of Beverly has always taken has sort of stationed us well for this. And I'm just grateful that I'm not meeting with or sending out those letters at this point in time. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Houseman.
Yes, good evening, Dr. Trocheck. Thank you for your presentation. I just have one question, and that is, it's somewhat based in a bricks and mortar model question that people would actually be present in school, which I assume at some point we will get back to, at least for purposes of this question. The increase in the enrollments that we're having, what kind of pressure is that putting on the capacity of the physical plant? We have all these new buildings and renovated elementary schools and so forth. Are we getting to a point where we are going to be having concerns about having too many students, enrollment going up, given the physical capacity of our schools? So thank you for your answer in advance.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I will say the foresight to have built the middle school for 5 through 8 and to alleviating some of that crowding that we had in our elementary schools really has been helpful. We would probably be struggling greatly if we were still trying to find room in our elementaries for a K through 5. So that's been really helpful. I think the middle school, we always would like more space, but I think that the middle school was built and has the capacity because we really designed it for flexible learning and for learn anywhere. And I also believe that some of our new thinking is going to be, is really all instruction sitting in rows in a classroom, or are there ways to leverage the campus and the outdoor learning spaces and some of those? So I'm feeling pretty confident that we'll be okay. I think that there are some preliminary thoughts that the high school might get a little crowded as we bring those really large classes up to the high school. However, I think I still believe that some of that same thinking can be applied at the high school. What will it look like? I think, the next 2 or 3 years is going to bring a lot of changes in education. But if there was anywhere that I'm wondering, it would be the physical space at the high school, which by no means is in trouble as a facility. It's a beautiful building and it has the opportunity, to be utilized really well. But, I think the decisions that were made that preceded me in this role certainly has helped us in that regard.
Thank you for your answer, Doctor.
Thank you, Councilor Houseman. Councilor Ames.
Thank you for that presentation, Dr. Chorchek. I just have 2 questions. The first one, and I know you've been working on this, is could you please just talk to us a little bit about your policies in terms of hiring and your attempts working to have a more diverse workforce, please?
Yep, thank you. Yeah, that's a challenge across the North Shore, across the Commonwealth for a lot of districts. And one of the things that I really do feel that we need to make a strong commitment to is we want our students to see themselves in their teachers, right? We want to have our workforce representative of the students that are sitting in the classrooms. And so the challenge certainly is the recruiting process and finding a way to bring educators of color to Beverly and to want to come and work in our schools. So we're working really closely with that. We do, one of the areas that we have just, really worked hard to do. One of the things we noticed is in Beverly, we end up hiring a lot of Beverly people, right? If you walk through the halls of Beverly High or Beverly Middle School, you're going to see a lot of Beverly High graduates, right? And so we know that we have students of color who are going into the field of education. And so we need to, I think, build a pipeline from the bottom up. I think that's one way that we can do that in Beverly. We want our students to come back and live in Beverly and work in Beverly. And so how are we supporting students going into the field of education, all students, but in students of color as well? And how do we help make sure that they have what they need to make it through the programs, the 4-year programs at the higher ed institutions, and make it attractive for them to come back and work for us in Beverly? So that's a practical thought in terms of, when recruiting is a challenge and we're up against all of the communities all around us who are all going to have this sudden sense of urgency around hiring in the minority populations. Well, let's take a look at what works for us here and where have we been finding our teachers to begin with, and how do we encourage and build upon that? So that's one area. And we had our signing letters last year. We had a day of signing for students and really embracing and promoting going into education as a field that we believe is a noble field and we believe is very rewarding. And how do we, how can we support that? Beyond that, there are opportunities, they were not available this year due to the closure, but there are opportunities to go and recruit at recruitment areas, to go into Boston, to some of the higher ed colleges that have a higher number of students that that we could maybe look to and try to bring in. So it's something it's not something that we're ignoring. It's something that's real challenging though, and that we're working really hard at.
No, that's great. That's great that you're working on it. And, I think it's a noble effort. It's better for the entire system and the community. And then secondly, I know personally, this spring has been traumatic, right? It just has, we've had to do all kinds of things that we've never done before. And so, and now you have, so I was wondering how you're dealing, what you're doing to support teachers and students with that trauma now, and they're about to hopefully, right, re-engage in the fall in that building? Have you any efforts to work to address any of those, real, honest, emotional stresses? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We have a lot of people that are working on a number of different things, but one of the task forces is specifically going to be looking at that whole idea of trauma, both for students and supporting staff, and how do we make sure that we have what we need in place for them. I think it's also the trauma is going to have a different face to it than some of the trauma that we've thought about originally. Often we have one picture of what someone who might have suffered trauma looks like, but now we have a whole new set of circumstances that have led to a little bit of a different kind of trauma. And so a lot of it is going to have to do with how we structure the school day, lots of opportunities for kids to have a chance to express themselves, share their emotions, get outside, trying to put an emphasis on play, particularly in the younger grades. How do we help re-engage in that, in that way? Family supports, how do we make sure that our families know that they can connect to us and what we can do and how we can do it? We have held this spring already. We have a consultant that works with us. Lisa Deeker is her name, and she is particularly a national expert sort of in trauma sensitive schools and how we do that. She has come up and done some consultation work with us in person, but she also this past spring created an asynchronous professional development opportunity for our teachers. And because of that, every single one of our teachers will be participating in a 2-hour training on how to mitigate trauma within their classrooms. And so that will all be completed before the end of the school year. And then going into next year, that's the kind of supports that we will continue to provide. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll go to Council Flaherty again.
Yes, quick question about transportation. Where do you see transportation going with all the new regulations?
We do not have guidance on that yet, and so we will be awaiting our guidance and directives from the Board of Health and the CDC. We know that we won't have 72 kids sitting in a bus elbow to elbow and knee to knee. So we know that there'll be some changes in what it will look like and how we'll be transporting our students. But again, that's something that we'll be working on. We're hoping to work not alone in this venture. We have talked a little bit about partnering with some of our neighboring cities to hear what, with a consultant, what kinds of things would be recommended for us to do, how would we best be able to do that. But the guidance has not been released on that yet. So we're waiting on that, and we will let the experts first tell us what are the things that we have to take care of first, and then we will look at how does that look in Beverly and how will we be able to make that work here.
Well said, Council Flaherty. Okay, Councilor Rotundo.
Dr. Trocek, I just have one question. It's, again, I know you don't have guidance, but I know some of the elementary schools have the shared table, the shared learning centers. And again, will that be an effect on you if these guidelines come out as what they're kind of saying with the 6-foot distances and all that stuff? But would that maybe impact the physical part of the furniture and stuff of that nature?
Well, we'll be working with whatever the guidance tells us and how we best have to make it work. So they'll give us, I believe, I've been led to believe anyway, that we're going to get guidance that has some pretty clear directives around certain things. One of them being 6-foot distancing, one of them being the number of students that you can have in a classroom at a time. There's talk about, the cohort commingling of cohorts and who can and can't mix and how you'll work through all of those things. However, in terms of furniture, we'll make our furniture work for us. There's a number of elementary teachers in particular are experts at reconfiguring classrooms and designing classroom spaces. So I'm sure that will be, they'll be all over Pinterest and everywhere else figuring out how to make that work and how to make some engaging learning spaces for our elementary students. So, but when that guidance comes out, we'll be able to kind of address that individually.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Feldman, please.
Yes, thank you. I noticed specifically that the first grade's huge. I think you know that that's a really big class, and I have a first grader at North Beverly, so I know firsthand how big it is. And I noticed that we were losing one first grade teacher there, and I'm just wondering first how that works, because the class isn't really getting any smaller, and then with the increase in enrollment over the years, I'm wondering if this is more that size class with the 4 classes and all in these elementary schools, if that's going to be more the norm, like how.
Okay, so I think, so yes, that's a great question. First of all, one of the things that happens with rising first grade in all of our kindergartens, because we had the tuition and full day kindergarten was a tuition program last year, we had kindergartners in different buildings that wasn't their home school. So we would have moved students. So there may have been students in the North Beverly kindergartens that wasn't their home school. So when they rise to first grade, the kindergartners go back to their home school. That changes the numbers in the configuration. So, we've worked really hard to try to maintain a reasonable class size. I will, however, admit that our class sizes next year in some of our grade levels will be higher than we are used to. We would hope that when and if the world lands itself on its feet and we're back in what we might call the norm, that we would again be able to address and work to kind of continue what we've worked really hard to do in Beverly all along. So I think that there will be some classes that the enrollments are a little higher, but that is a necessary, sacrifice, whatever you want to call it, in order to kind of maintain the budget, the level serviced budget that we have right now. So I've worked with principals. The principals are very aware of where those grade levels are. They will utilize resourcing to make sure that they mitigate any negative consequences that might come as a result of having a larger class size. So, the principals are on it, and they know exactly which ones. And I didn't make any of those moves without the collaboration of the principal in the building. So it wasn't a surprise for anyone. So.
Thank you, Councilor Feldman. Anybody else? Dr. Trocheck, thank you for being here.
All right, well, thanks for having me.
As we hopefully return to the new norm in September. And know that the city council is always here to help if we can be of any assistance. Thank you to the entire school committee for joining us this evening also. Next on the docket is the man who has his fingers in just about everything here in the city of Beverly. That would be our Director of Public Services, Director of Engineering, Mike Collins. Mr. Collins, how are you, sir?
Excellent. How are you, Mr. President?
Very good. Always good to see you. How do you want to start? You want to talk about engineering? You want to talk about public services?
Whatever your pleasure is. Usually we start with engineering and move on from there. Okay,
let's do it. And Mr. Brian Nelson here also, if he can be of any assistance to anybody.
Sure. I understand you have an abbreviated format this year. I'm not exactly sure how you've been doing it. I haven't had the chance to tune into the other ones, but you just want me to give it a little high-level overview, or?
Yeah, high-level overview, and then we'll take it to the counselors for questions. Please.
Sure. We, across the board, worked with the mayor and finance director of sales to reduce our overall budget by about $250,000 from last year, even though there's a built-in salary increase, contractual salary, additional week's pay for a 53rd week this year. So so that those things all totaled bid into our overall operating budget for this fiscal year. And so we've had to make some cuts across the board. We're prepared to live with those cuts because there's obviously some very extenuating circumstances. But it is it will have an impact on some level of service, naturally, particularly the capital side. Trying to get the larger projects done, it's going to be more difficult. The engineering department is a juggernaut of activity under the direction of Eric Barber. He's doing a great job for us. And we've had some some transitions there with Rob leaving, and moved some personnel around, and it's worked out quite well. Lisa Chandler will be now our assistant city engineer. She's a registered professional engineer, so that's a much better fit for her qualifications and her experience. So we're very happy to have her move up into that role. The time-consuming part of our job is parking and traffic in engine, and that's always a joy. Still trying to work out we have a very technology-based parking and traffic enforcement program, and the technology is very powerful, but always not fully right. It's been fun to work through that, but we have an excellent team and overcome all the challenges so far. The Associated of Engineering, just touch on it light, talked about, I'm sure Mr. Ailes will touch on it later in sanitation, but next year is the last year of our solid waste contract with JRM, and that'll be something that we'll have to talk about a lot over the coming year, because we don't currently pay for recycling, and it looks like recycling will cost us more than trash disposal next year. So it's going to be trash disposal is going to go up significantly, and recycling become a very costly enterprise. So we'll see what the world looks like. Since China made their changes to their intake of recycled materials, the world has changed quite a bit, and we'll see over the next year if things in domestic markets or even foreign markets start to pick up and help us out there. But that could be a significant increase in operating costs that we face in the future. Do you want me to stop before we go into public works, or?
Sure. Any questions on the engineering budget for Mr. Collins? Wow, crickets. Okay, let's talk about public services. Oh, hold on. Council Flowers chimed in a little late.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. President. I was slow. Mr. Collins, thank you, first of all, for being here, as always. I just had a question just with your last note about trash and recycling going up, which is something that I think we've heard that that's coming and understand why. I was just curious, and I don't know if you have any insight on this, whether with that, if we continue rolling out or expanding our curbside composting program, do you see that could provide any relief if there were more waste being diverted from those other two streams? I don't know if there's been any conversation about that, but I'd be curious your insight there.
There's no free lunch when it comes to waste disposal, because curbside composting costs as well, especially as it becomes more popular. There's only so many places you can bring the composted material or the material to compost. So we have to pay those vendors as well. So as long as it's the compost is lower than trash, that's a good thing. There are advantages to the composting in general. If it can be done successfully, and they can capture the methane that's produced, that will have a significant impact on the overall environment. Currently, neither have any way to capture methane that's produced from their composting operations. But in the future, we are always looking at things like digesters, and which would accelerate the process and also capture the methane. So if we can eliminate the food waste from the trash stream, that's a potential game changer there for the overall environment. So something we look forward to talking a lot more about.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to those conversations too. I definitely am a supporter of that, so if I can be helpful as we work towards that. But thank you so much, Mr. Collins. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Council Flowers. Councilor Ames.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. And I think before everything shut down, one of the last meetings I had was with Sue Higgins, and you certainly couldn't have a better partner in that sort of endeavor in terms of trying to be as innovative and practical with waste as Sue. So I have a couple of questions. One was on the meter personnel line item. I think it's 14101 in the budget. And I was just trying to understand it, given the fact that the meters were not collecting right now, and what was your sense of when that would come back online, and just how those numbers sort of, when you had, the 2019 actual was at 88,000 and now it's up to 120. Just, I know there's something going on there and I just would like to understand it, please.
Sure. There's a number of things at play there. We are ramping back into collections now. We're using a few weeks of transition time back into the real world and giving people warning so that they're not caught off guard. But we are going back into collection mode now. And what you see there is an amalgamation of a number of part-time positions. There's one full-time and a number of part-time positions. And we've had a lot of turnover in those part-time jobs. They're akin to the same struggles you'll find trying to get school bus drivers and crossing guards and things like that. It's the same. We're targeting the same people, really. And our best source is retired postal workers, because they like to be outside and they like to walk. So it's highly variable in terms of the overall money spent each year on salary, on how long we have vacancies for, and how many we can actually fit. And we're exploring some different staffing models to see if we can be more effective at that and attract a more consistent group of talent. What was the other question? I'm sorry.
I didn't tell you yet.
No, one at a time.
That's right. On line 14102, it's a consulting line, I believe. And again, just to try to understand it, the actual was 17. The revised budget was was like around somewhere around $100,000, and then you're down to 40. So I'm trying to understand, A, was there something you were trying to do that you didn't do, and B, as it's gone from 17 to 40, what were you planning this year? Thank you.
Consulting engineering line item, it's sort of unspecified. It's much like, it's probably most analogous to the outside counsel in the solicitor's line item, where you don't know what you're going to face during the course of the fiscal year. So it's not exactly specified as to what it's going to be used for. It's typically used for environmental concerns up during the course of the year, because inevitably we find something contaminated somewhere that we need to deal with, or it could be traffic and safety related. So the whole host of different types of things that we spend that on during the course of the year. Could even be for consultant for sanitation or what have you, energy efficiency, those types of things. So there's no end of what we can spend that money on, and 40,000 doesn't buy you a lot of consulting time. So this coming year, we have a number of projects. Most of them are things like MS4, the stormwater related to the EPA mandate, and that'll be paid out of the sewer enterprise fund. So most of our big projects with consultants have funding sources. We do spend at least a portion of the money that we allocate for paving work on consultants related to traffic control work for paving projects. So it's incorporated in that. But like I said, it's an unspecified line that we just spend. Every year is a little bit different.
No, I bet. And given all the construction that you've been doing the last couple of years, you just were you lucky last year? Is that where it went? Just in terms of, spending about half of that? Was that just, you didn't hit up against it?
It's just strictly a matter of, we didn't have anything in particular that came up. We also, there is a lot of movement of money within my budget not my budget, within the Department of Engineering budget, as necessary throughout the fiscal year as priority if we have to move funds around. So I believe last year we had to transfer some of that another line item to cover another project.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Ames. Councilor Frades.
But Commissioner, you and I have worked on so many problems over the years and have resolved 99.9% of them, so I thank you and your crew. However, just talking about the JRM situation and the composting conversation came up, and Stanley Street continues to be the bane of my existence. The neighbors are upset. It takes an awful lot of time for us to go down there and meet with them. And now that JRM might be exiting the scene, do you have any thoughts on that? Or at least, we'll stay in conversation as that time comes. Thanks.
Yeah, certainly it's a difficult topic because I believe as a community we need the compost site. You see how desperately the communities around us rely on it as well because they don't have compost sites. It's an asset that we need to have, and it's difficult. I understand that sometimes it smells. They're hauling compost out of there today, and you can smell it around the neighborhood as they're moving material. But we try to keep those days to a minimum. Try to do it on days when people's windows are hopefully closed or there's a good breeze to keep things stirred up as much as possible. But it is as Beverly gets more and more built, they're knocking on our door. So it's I don't think there's a place in Beverly we could move it to. So for now, that's what we have, and we do the best we can. I think JRM's done a good job managing it. It's not a very big site, so takes hands-on every day, 6 days a week. They're there trying to keep the place running and keep it available. It's a very popular resource with our residents, so it would be very difficult to survive without it. But I'm not sympathetic to the people who live closest to it either. So.
All set, Councilor Frades? Councilor Feldman.
Yes, thank you. And I might have asked this question before when we've met before. I can't remember, but I was wondering if, in terms of parking meter revenue, if there would be a significant hit to the revenue stream if we looked into shortening the hours to be until free parking after 6 or 7, because I've had a couple of constituents have concerns about meetings downtown, especially public meetings, and even for the restaurants, being able to have parking available for free a little earlier. I just was wondering what type of impact that would have on the revenue if you could look at it by the hour to see if that would be significant or not.
We have tremendous data that we can look at. I almost hate to use the word tremendous because of the association of it nowadays. We can dive into that data. I don't have any number off the top of my head. I know that we specifically extended the program into the evening to benefit, because that's where some of the busiest times downtown are, and it was done to be a benefit to those downtown businesses, and we believe it is, and it has been successful at making parking more available out on Cabot Street, which was the primary purpose of the programs. One of the things we realized very quickly on is we don't have a shortage of parking downtown, but it was poorly utilized. And so the program is designed to encourage people to use the lots and to have high turnover in front of the businesses. And so far it's been successful, and that's why we've continued into the evening. But we can look at what 6 to 8 o'clock is bringing in terms of revenue.
That would be great. I would appreciate that, even if it was just maybe 1 or 2 of the lots closer to public buildings. I would appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you, Council Feldman. On to public services, Mr. Collins.
Sure. I'll start by just acknowledging that this was a tremendously difficult year for a lot of reasons, global pandemic and waiting for the locust to come in next. But, personally, and I think for a lot of us on the call, the loss of Jim Turcott, my longtime assistant and very close friend this year has, it's made it a very tough year. Irreplaceable in terms of how much he helped me out and how much he did for the citizens of Beverly and Salem before that, and just an all-around great guy. So I'd be remiss in not remembering him tonight and remembering that there is a world outside of COVID-19, and of course, it's been a tremendous loss. But he would be. I know what he would tell me to do, and it wouldn't be to sit and wallow, so we move on. The public services budget that we've put forth is similar to the engineering budget, where it's an overall cut in service with some contractually obligated salary increases, which made the cut even a little bit deeper. So it's a year-over-year cut in funding. But we've been in this position before. Frankly, the mayor and the finance director did not ask for as much flesh out of my budget as I thought, because I think it's been a very, I know Bryant has probably taken 10 years off his life in this process, but he's done such a good job with it, and it's made it easy for me. This is, I guess, my third, I don't know if we call this a recession, but this is certainly a time of financial stress. And, I've been through the budget process on two other recessions, two other severe recessions, and had significant cuts, lost a number of positions, 9 positions one year. So this is nothing compared to that. But it is a cut. So we'll have to do more with less, but perhaps to our, to our own detriment, we can do more with less, because we have an excellent workforce in the public services department. The men and women of the department do a great job. I guess the only division within public services that didn't change really at all is snow and ice. That was level funded year over year. Fortunately, we had a light winter this year, which is almost torture, because you're waiting for the storm and it never really materialized. And so many winters it does. But there aren't many significant changes in the budget this year. One of the things we look forward to is, at some point in the future, we will start to see a savings related to the retrofit of the LED streetlights. I can tell you that because of the technology we put into the streetlights, every single streetlight has a little Verizon cell phone built into it, which allows us to control them and allows us to monitor them. And it allows us to measure within 0.5% accuracy, which is more accurate than the meter on the side of our house, what the power consumption is. And I can tell you that if you take any time period year over year from before we converted to the now, we are using 80% less power than we used in the past, because we were very aggressive about the wattages we picked and the lamp the technology we use. So we went after the three things: reliability and quality manufacturer. But the highest efficacy, the greatest light output per watt, and we were looking for a light that was the most dark sky friendly light that we could buy, and I think we hit all of those marks right on. But unfortunately, National Grid is woefully understaffed in their administrative areas, and it takes 2+ years for them to catch up with a retrofit like that. They make us whole in the end. We get all the money, we get refunded, or however it works out. Everything works out in the end, but it's not satisfying yet because the bill hasn't gone down and it won't go down for some time. But perhaps that might come just at a time when we need that relief. You know, if it comes, next year's a tighter year. You know, there'll be at least $150,000 in savings annually from that retrofit. There's really, honestly, the cuts are spread out throughout the budget. You know, I think we're going to be able to manage with those cuts and still move money between the line items as priorities shift throughout the fiscal year. But I don't want to take up too much time because I understand we're trying to do somewhat of an abbreviated presentation tonight. So happy to answer any specific questions on it.
Questions for Mr. Collins? There's always a little delay. Councilor Ames.
And another delay. So I was curious about, I have a few questions here, maybe three. First was line 14223, the paving line. I was hoping you could perhaps speak to that, please.
Sure. If you go in the Wayback Machine, that line used to be funded around $200,000 a year, and in the 2004 financial crisis, that line got basically zeroed out, and it's crept back a little bit over the years. But in more recent years, what we've done is we've appropriated money through the capital process. So there's a citywide street paving line item that's really supplanted that. So that is not as much emphasized as there's a significant amount of money appropriated through this citywide paving line item. So we were able to shave this a little bit without really impacting services as much.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, I was also the line. Oh, I lost my note. Here it is. 14227. And this, I always have just curiosity about this line item. It's the equipment line item because it goes up and down. I'm always curious, like, what did you buy last year? And what are you foreseeing buying this year? So just, you know,
Sure.
a manufacturer to a guy who builds things. I'm wondering what goes in there.
Yeah, it's funny for me. It's somewhat of a struggle for me to remember what did I buy, because it takes so long between when we order something and when we receive it. It can take a year for a lot of these trucks. So you forget that you even ordered it, and you forget what year you ordered it, and it does become a little bit confusing for me unless I look back at my notes. But that is what we rely on for all of our capital equipment replacements for everything. We did get a grant this year, which we used some of that money to, because the grant wasn't for the full cost of the truck. It's for a truck we call the chip truck, which is just what it sounds as where the wood chips go from the chipper. So we got a grant to replace the chip truck, but I think we had to spend about $70,000 out of that line item to match the grant. We had another truck, which is more of your typical landscaper size truck that came in this year. That's what we paid, bought last year. Replaced an old gas cooler Crown Vic that the engineering department used with a more efficient compact SUV, something that doesn't need the maintenance that old car needed as well. So we do try to strive to. The mayor reminds me every time we buy a vehicle that we're looking at certainly low emissions, alternative fuels, and always electric if we can. In our world, it's a little, there's not as much money in making electric equipment yet, So the supply is not great yet, but it's getting better every day. It's a little challenging for us as well because we're a 24/7 operation. So as you can picture, battery electric needs to come a long way before we can have snow plows with battery electric. I can't, like a hot swappable
You don't
batteries
have
or
the
something
power.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, they certainly have the physical power. Electric motors are incredibly efficient in terms of 100% torque at 0 RPM. It's all great, but if you run out of battery in a 10 below snowstorm, which batteries don't like cold, extreme cold like that, then that's not going to go over too well. But there are some hybrid models that are being produced that we're looking at to see if there are certain things like a tree truck. We need to buy a forestry truck hopefully this upcoming year if we can afford to. And some of the tree trucks that are being made now, the bucket portion runs off of battery. So when the crew pulls up to a job site, they shut off the chassis motor so that diesel engine stops running, and the battery runs the bucket because they need power to run the bucket. So normally that truck would have to be left running the entire time the crew is working. And those are some of the ways that electric vehicles, it's not electric propulsion, but they're using it for things like that. So the market is catching up a little bit. So it's all kinds of stuff. We have a tremendous need with equipment. When you think about lawnmowers, the lawnmowers that we use are, they're $10,000 to $12,000 each. Those are the smaller ones. The bigger ones are $60,000+. And the bigger trucks you see floating around town, those are over $200,000. So it doesn't take much equipment to spend a lot of money.
So curiously, so this chip truck or some of these other $200,000 trucks, how long do you usually keep them on the road?
Well, the chip truck that we're replacing is a 1997, I believe, which is way beyond what anyone else would like that on the road for. I think that's a testament to two things. That's careful use, and we have a fantastic motor pool full of unbelievable mechanics. And then I guess since we're on the top of mechanics, we did, as of about a month and a half ago, after a long time city employee Jack Moore in the fire department, the public service department was transferred the maintenance of the fire department vehicles. So that's a new responsibility as of a couple month and a half, 2 months ago. So yeah, we're not purchasing the fire department vehicles or anything like that, but we're responsible for the maintenance of their vehicles. So
as you know, we're looking at a fire truck, right? And so at some point offline, Mr. Ailes will have to explain to me why, so this is a 23-year-old truck you're replacing, and is that a capital, one-time purchase? We don't have to get into that now. But so for me, this is really helpful and really shines a light on it, because I look at this big number all the time and then I watch it sort of swing back and forth. So even if over time, if kindly it was ever, if you could kind of list that out a little more, it's really helpful, I think. And it's an asset to understand what we own. And it's also, it sounds like it's equipment that you can't easily lease, because of course you don't want to own the asset if you can lease it and go. But it sounds like these are things that take a lot of wear, a lot of heavy use, and that is, you're doing what you need to be doing in terms of this equipment purchase. So
yeah, I think leasing, Mr. Ailes could probably speak to this better than I can, but I think leasing is a model, particularly in public works equipment. There are companies that offer leasing, but really it's just a financing mechanism, paying extra for that vehicle to lease it because they don't want it back when you're done. So it's always a lease to own in our world, and at that point you're just financing it through them. So.
And I just have one last question. It's just in terms of, so when we were looking at the transfer of the $1.4 million to finish up the water work a couple of weeks ago, I had asked Mr. Perry if you had a budget for that. And do you have budgets created for these different projects and then run them against actual? And does the council ever take a look at these things?
We do. We have, like, if you look at our street paving, we prepare a very detailed budget, and we track the cost time as the invoices come in, and we compare. We're always trying to benchmark ourselves and see how well we're doing with our estimates. Because it's one thing to estimate it's going to be $1 million and then come in and say, oh, it only costs $500,000, because that's just a bad estimate. So we don't want to be either way. We want to be right on the money. And for the most part, our projects do come right on. Obviously, every project we get is tracked from inception. So all of our tracking stuff, what did the council appropriate? What is our ceiling? Because most on the bigger projects, the city council is not giving us money per se, authorization to borrow money or to spend money. So it's not actual cash in hand. So it's a little bit more theoretical. So you have to, in my opinion, you have to be even more careful with it, because it's easy to say when the account can just keep going negative, it's easy to get yourself into trouble. So cognizant of that, because I really like my job. So we got to be very careful and keep detailed budgets for every project.
Thank you so much for all of this, Mr. Collins. Someday when we can, I'd love to be able to come in and dig into that, just understand how you do that. But thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Houseman.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Mr. Collins, you and I don't always agree on various different constituent issues that I have to wrestle with. But I just want to say publicly what I've said to you privately many times, including recently, how much I appreciate your professionalism, your promptness, your access to me as a city councilor in helping out. I think you just do a tremendous job, whether I agree with you or disagree with you on any given issue. I just think you're a tremendous asset to the city, and I appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. I'm only able to do the job because I have such an excellent team behind me, and I try to put myself in your shoes as well to understand your perspective of why you're asking these things and where you're coming from, and try to. I've been around, I think, long enough to hopefully understand how I can best service the council and help you do your job as well.
Thank you again.
Councilor Houseman, you held to your word. That was very brief. Thank you. And great words, Michael. That's how we all feel about you and your team. Councilor Flaherty, please.
Yes, with all the businesses reopening downtown, where are we with the Cabot Street project, and when do you see the completion date?
There's very little left to do. The brickwork should finish up this week, and then essentially the sidewalks are done. The tree department, the forestry department's going to start planting some trees next week. That won't be much impact to the businesses. The mayor is circulating a survey to the businesses to take their temperature in terms of how they feel about us going there, working on the roadway any further this season. I take a wild guess how they feel about it. And I think the fact that we have outdoor dining taking place on the street not as we speak, as the one day of rain in the last month. But I feel like, that fact right there, that we've set up dining spaces out in the roadway, is sort of made the decision for us, but we haven't officially pulled the trigger on any particular decision. Like I said, the mayor's having one last discussion with the businesses this week to determine what the exact course of action is. But by the end of tomorrow, I would say 99% of the brickwork, if there's a little bit left, it'll be wrapped up in the next couple of days. So we're finally out of their hair.
All set, Council Flaherty? Great. Mr. Collins, do you want to talk about water and sewer? Maybe Mr. Ailes can?
Sure. Brian, do you want to start with? Yeah.
Could I maybe just give just a general overview for some of the newer council members about just enterprise fund structure?
Yeah, I would do that. That's a great idea, Mr. Ailes.
Okay, so we're going to talk now about enterprise funds. The city has 7 of them, which is somewhat, from what Mr. Perry tells me, on the higher end in terms of other communities. But the way the enterprise funds work is they act as essentially its own business operations. And there's effectively somewhat of a brick wall around each of them. And they serve a certain purpose, and they take in revenue related directly to that service. And no two shall be combined. No two shall, that there's those brick walls between them. So when we talk and we come to the council for a certain authorization related to the water fund or the sewer fund, those costs relate directly back to the end user in some form, particularly in a water sewer rate, which we're going to talk about in a second. It translates to an adjustment on the rate that users pay for the use or the benefit of the drinking water supply and the sewerage system and the sanitation sewer system in the city. So I just wanted to give that overview as we talk through these enterprise funds. Thanks.
Mr. Perry, do you want to add anything about the enterprise funds?
Good evening, Mr. President, members of council. Not really. I mean, bottom line, they pretty much balance to one another. I think we just answer any questions either you or your colleagues may have. Mr. Ailes summarized enterprise funds, and I know we'll be talking a little bit about them Monday night as well. I gave you a memo today, but no, I really have nothing to add, Mr. President.
Okay. Mr. Ailes, do you want to talk about water and sewer? Or, do you want Mr. Collins to do that?
I think, in a very general and concise way, they are what they're titled. One is for the water distribution throughout the city. The other one is for the upkeep and maintenance of the sewer system. Both environments are costly environments to run for the benefits of the ratepayers. Mr. Collins and his team does tremendous work to try to minimize costs, to try to be forward thinking in their solutions. And so I guess without, delaying this any longer than we have to, the budgets pretty much stand for themselves. They're pretty close to what they were last year. They do rely in both cases on some minimal fund balance draw to kind of keep the rates at a similar level to where they were for FY20. We feel that's important in this environment. And so I'll just open it up to any questions unless Commissioner Collins would like to add something to that.
No, I mean, I'm good at, like Mr. Ailes said, it's pretty straightforward. Very similar to last year. We do have some pressures on us. Like I mentioned that MS4 requirement of the there was a number of state initiatives over the last couple of years, which have made the cost of doing business very expensive, particularly MS4 regulation. And that's in the sewer enterprise. It's costly, never, like a lot of things that I'm not sure it does much good, except what we're trying to do is we're trying to not just check the box. We're putting a significant effort into building a program that checks the box, gets something out of it. Because if we're going to spend a lot of time and effort, we believe that it's worth having an effort provide a useful product at the end of the day. Because if we just simply did what the program required, I don't think that at this point the program would do much for the local environment. It's all the program geared towards protecting the coastal resources. We've developed a very robust program that's going to require more work on our part in the short term, but in the long term, this is, a lot of this is Eric's blood, sweat, and tears that have been put into this. This, I think, is going to be a model for other communities to follow, really. So, somewhat, if there is such a thing as business as usual in the sewer and water world.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from councils on the water and sewer funds? Okay. Mr. Rales, do you want to talk about the sanitation enterprise fund?
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. Perry.
Yeah, sorry. I was wondering if Mike could just spend a moment talking about the increase in the SESD fund account there. It went up a little bit more than prior years, and I know there's a lot of challenges down there. I thought maybe if he would be kind enough to just talk a little bit about why that went up a bit more than prior years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry.
Yeah,
I did note that.
We were fortunate in the last few years for a few things. Debt fell off over at SESD, so that lowered our overall cost of operations over there, which lowered our assessment. Then the SESD budget is probably the most complicated budget you can ever imagine. It takes several months to get to the budgeting process. It starts with this fun process called flows and loads. And this cost basis for there's several different cost centers, and each one has a different cost basis. It's allocated in a different method, and then most of those are on a 3-year running average. And it just so happens that for the cost centers, every year there's the 5-member communities. There's winners and losers in those 3-year running averages. And it just so happened it was our turn to lose. The change is not really significant, but it is an increase for us compared to some of the other communities. But in the next year, somebody else will be the community that takes the biggest hit. We are, between Salem, Peabody, and we're the 3 biggest contributors to SESD. With the Amberson and Marblehead in the following us. So it's just it's a result of some favorable years in the 3-year running averages falling off, and some more average years coming into the average, which resulted in some modest increases in the overall budget. But the overall budget at FCSD, the all-in budget is a very small increase, under 2% overall.
Mr. Perry, good?
I'm good, Mr. President. Thank you.
Okay. Do we want to talk about sanitation, Mr. Collins? Or Mr. Ailes?
Dirty subject.
It is a dirty subject. So you have a sense of humor.
I will add, Mr. President, just to this topic. This is one of our few enterprise funds that is not self-contained entirely. So every year we, as a community, supplement the overall sanitation operations through the general fund. And in this year, it looks like the general fund is supplementing the sanitation enterprise fund by $1.25 million, $1.25 million. That's about half of the overall budget for the sanitation enterprise fund. The other half of the revenue comes not from the general fund, it comes from the fees that are charged all of the users and that you receive as part of your water and sewer bill. So I just wanted to point that out, that it is subsidized.
And that's how it's been since the sometimes not very popular trash fee was instituted 14 or 15 years ago.
Correct.
Okay.
For as long as you can probably remember, we've been on the right side of history in terms of our trash overall operations, because Beverly, like a lot of communities, sign 20-year contracts with the local waste incinerator in August. Half of the communities got absolutely crushed for 20 years, and half did really well. We were on the half that did really well. We've then been in contracts with JRM for a long time with excellent service. Nothing's perfect, but they've done an excellent job from our perspective. When we compare ourselves to communities and see the hassles they have, we don't have their problems. We have our own problems, but we don't have the most common problems that you see around. So we've been served very well by JRM over the years, and our contracts with them have been very economical. But you know, we sort of brace for impact in terms of what's coming in the future. The recycling market is completely vaporized and is now becoming, you know, most commonly costing communities more to recycle than it would be to just throw it away as trash. That doesn't mean that's what we should do. It just means we need to figure out how to keep going. We need to get some of our students to graduate and be really smart and figure out what to do with glass and plastic and all these other things that are a menace to us at this time.
Great, thank you, Mr. Collins. Any questions? All right, Mr. Ailes, what other enterprise funds do you want to talk about tonight?
Mr. President.
Laura Bullion is around from the airport.
Yeah, Mrs. Bullion's here. We can certainly do the airport. We could touch on the golf and tennis, and I believe we've already touched on recreation and the senior enterprise fund. So
right,
the remaining two would wrap it up.
Mr. President.
I have a Councilor Houseman wants to ask a question, and then we'll go to the airport enterprise fund first.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I was already in the queue for a question on enterprise, on the sanitation. So I'll direct this question, I guess, to Mr. Perry. Although I don't see him on my, oh, there he is on my screen. Yeah. But Mr. Ailes or Mr. Collins can feel free to jump in. So when we were doing the financial forecasting, we talked a lot about how the JRM contract was coming up and we would have this additional hit coming up. Just conceptually in terms of how the additional cost interacts on one hand with the general budget and on the other hand with the enterprise fund. Let's assume for the sake of discussion that we're going to, you know, have an increase in costs. Does that mean that that increase in cost under a new contract will mean an additional amount will come from the general fund to subsidize the sanitation enterprise fund? Is that how the funding will work, accounting wise?
Absolutely,
Okay.
Counselor.
Yeah.
The fee structure is so consistent year over year. 1.275. That's what we bring in every year, and it flows a little bit up and down. But any cost increases need to be absorbed entirely by the general fund, unless there's an adjustment to the rate structure.
Okay, Mr. Perry, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just say, I mean, he is correct. I mean, there's some history to this, which I'm learning myself. It's a large subsidy to keep the sanitation rates down. The administration, with the approval of the council, certainly could raise those rates if they wanted to, or keep them the same, or even drop them if they want. But certainly, I'm sure we'll have a robust conversation when we get the new contract resolved and looking at the challenges that this will have with the FY22 budget, as well as the other things we talked about, our pensions, debts, and things of that nature. But yeah, I look forward, Mr. Chairman, when we get back together in, I think, November with your forecasting, and we'll be plugging those numbers in the spreadsheets and talking about it pretty seriously at that period of time.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Houseman. Airport. Ms. Bullion. Well, let us know what's going on.
Hi there, can you hear me all right?
Try again.
Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Great. Hi, everyone. So I figured for some of you, I'm as far as coming up airport, so I figured I will give you a brief overview of the airport, where it has been and where it will be going, and the impact of COVID as to our budget.
Gloria,
So
can you
this
turn up
budget
your
was
volume a
put
little?
together. Can you hear me okay now?
Better.
Okay. So this budget was put together with conservative figures during the COVID pandemic. This year we are on schedule to have our highest year in terms of revenues and fund balance, just as COVID hit the aviation industry as well as the world market. So a little bit of history with the airport. Prior to me coming on board, the airport was about to undergo a deconstruction and contraction of its primary runway, decreasing its width and ability to accommodate business-type aircraft. For several years, our businesses commission, city, local leaders, and industry associations wrote letters of support to the FAA and Mass DOT to not deconstruct the runway, as we would have lost our use of the runway to corporate operators, which would have also allowed our businesses and leaseholds to leave, since their aircraft could no longer serve or use the smaller runway. At a minimum, we would have lost over $300,000 annually, as well as our losses in annual grants. The airport would then have to be supported by the city for its continued operations and not operate as an enterprise account. Because of my experience working with airports across the nation on forecasting and master plans, I told the FAA they needed to redo the forecast and reevaluate the fleet mix for the primary runway and reissue the forecast with current and future trending data. The FAA agreed in 2019, and now we are in the midst of conducting our master plan, which will change the outlook of the airport and the community for the next 20 years. This past year, we were recognized as a standout airport in Massachusetts, and I have been asked to present on what we do so differently. It is our continued engagement with our stakeholders, businesses, and community that have really led us to this national and international recognition from magazines and other associations. Prior to my leadership, we went from being number 10 in the state to now becoming number 2 in terms of general aviation airports. We employ at the airport with the businesses over 300 individuals from Beverly, Wenham, and Danvers, as well as the surrounding communities. We have over a $34 million economic impact annually to the community, as well as 413 acres and 2 million square feet of pavement, and 18 businesses operating and starting to thrive again, even amidst the COVID crisis. Safety, service are our utmost importance, as we are required to maintain our services under the grant assurances. This year, we have brought on a new international recognized business, and we are in the development of bringing on 4 new additional businesses, which will greatly impact the positive outlook and growth for our future. I have an extremely dedicated and driven team and staff who have shown exemplary work for the city and the airport through our events, projects, accidents, and their daily tasks. Our highest revenue sources are from our ground leases, landing fees, sales of Jet A and avgas fuels. We had to change the way we do business with our stakeholders, customers, and businesses with an updated website, with other documents available to the public, and our master plan, and ways for the community to get in touch with us. As a general aviation airport, we have different revenue sources. So we do not have airline fees. So like I said, we rely on the landing fees, ground lease fees, and then sale of fuel flow, because those are our highest revenue sources. For us, we are a business corporate airport, category airport, regional airport with international national flights. April was our highest impacted month in terms of operations. We saw a decrease in over 43% due to COVID. Although the airline industry outlook is expecting approximately 2 to 3 years for a recovery time for activity levels we have seen prior to COVID, we are not anticipating the same, since we are a non-airline and corporate reliever airport for Boston Logan. The start of June has already started to show the positive signs of growth from our corporate operators and our general aviation smaller business aircraft usage as the businesses have reopened, as some of the businesses have reopened with phase 2. Going forward, the FAA and MassDOT only see COVID as having limited impacts in Beverly Airport. They have approved our forecast of aviation activity in the airport master plan and continue to fund and support the airport infrastructure development, which will impact the airport and surrounding communities for the next 20 years. We had public meetings and open houses planned just prior to the onset of COVID, in which individuals from Beverly, Danvers, and Wenham were going to be invited to have an open discussion on what the airport master plan and the infrastructure of the airport will look like in the next 3 to 5, 10, and 20 years out. Since those dates have changed, I invite you to attend those meetings, since I know that the regular council meetings will be, going through the summer recess. And if you are, even if you are or aren't able to attend, I will report to the council on what we find from these open houses, public meetings during August, if we are able to hold them. To wrap this up, I love my job, I love my team, I love this community, and I'm committed to making this airport everything it will be, with a new commitment to sustainability, customer service, and a new airport-wide employee appreciation program. I think you should be proud to see what an incredible community asset this is, and invite you out for a tour or a deeper discussion with me on our vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bullion. And financially, you're in good shape.
Yes, we are actually. Yes.
Mr. Ailes, any comments on the enterprise fund?
No, none. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Ailes or Ms. Bullion? Councilor Feldman.
Thank you. I just had 2 questions on some of the bigger shift. The contracted services for snow removal and field subcontracting, what was there a new contract or something? Because it's reduced significantly, so I was wondering what the reduction was. And then kind of on the similar side of the wording on the next page, the increase in funding to address field and runway maintenance, cleaning and inspection is up a lot. And I was just wondering if there's the contracted services, and then probably the large increase in the maintenance, if that's a capital expense. I was just wondering about those 2.
Sure. So do you mind actually telling me what line item it is? I'm trying to pull it up right now.
Oh, sure. It's so the contracted services 53036. It looks like.
Sure. So
the layout. Yeah.
Sure. Sorry. So our contracted services, we have various consultants. So we have consultants undergoing our airport master plan that is mostly funded by the FAA. A small portion of our fund balance has actually been going towards that. Our contracted services, we use anything for new lease development, anything, some of the most recent testing with the PFAS, in which the last time we presented, some of the invoices were previously being paid from that. We underwent a new airport website, so any of those contracted services, we've put those items in the anything that we use for the airport, such as the contracted services. A lot of it is legal fees from our aviation attorneys. Anytime we undergo a new lease, we always usually pass some of those fees on for the new lease. And believe your other question was the increase in maintenance and repairs.
Yep.
Yeah, the maintenance, cleaning, and inspection warranted by operations 7 days a week and 20 hours a day. I was just wondering if that is that COVID related? I wasn't sure what the large increase was.
Sure. So we previously, in our last budget, we requested a full-time operations staff to staff during the hours of our other maintenance staff, during the hours that individual was not on duty, because we are a 24/7 airport. So we never close unless conditions warrant unsafe. So for an accident or very large snow event, we may close. But we are actually required to remain open. And so we were able to hire a part-time staff for operations and maintenance for weekend coverage to continue the required maintenance as we're required under our grant assurances. And so the additional remaining value from that part-time position, instead of it being a full-time position, went into the repair and building maintenance, because we still do have those expenditures before we can redo our runway, which we're expecting to be in about the next 3 years. We will have further repairs to the runway, to the taxiways, because of the condition that they are in currently. So we did allocate those funds to where we saw that we will most likely be doing crack repairs or other expenditures towards the maintenance of the airfield itself.
Thank you.
All set, Counselor?
Yep, thanks.
Thank you, Counselor Feldman. Great questions. Counselor Houseman, 3 times.
Yeah, I had some technical issues or technical illiteracy.
All right.
I thought my request kept disappearing. So,
No, it's there, 3 times.
sorry about that.
That's okay. That's the night.
Yeah, but I do have 3 questions as it happens. First, you mentioned in your sort of introduction that the airport had gone from, I believe, from number 10 to number 2 in the Commonwealth in terms of general aviation. Could you explain to me like what was going on vis-a-vis the other 8, so that you changed the position relative to the other in that group of 10?
Sure. So as far as, like I said, we brought on some other businesses that actually increased our capabilities of the airport. So instead of going to Bedford, Boston, or some of what we used to have as competing airports, are no longer necessarily competing for those same types of businesses, planes, corporate activity. And so bringing on these new businesses that increased our capability, as well as increasing the awareness of the airport. So I increased our marketing. That's another thing we put in our consulting fees. Increases to the website, so our advertising increased, as well as our outreach. So constantly getting out the word. I've joined, I'm on probably 10 different boards or associations to get the word out to developers, to other corporate activity, aviation groups. Which has really, we saw a 17% increase this past year in our total operations, which has bumped us up to number 2 in terms of general aviation airports in the Commonwealth. Just ahead of us is Bedford in terms of our operations. So it's phenomenal as far as what we're seeing in corporate activity, as well as the general aviation use. And when I talk about fleet mix, it means a mixture of business type category aircraft, as well as the small flight training type aircraft. So we saw large increases in that. Like I said, 17% just this year alone, which is phenomenal for a general aviation airport. And it speaks really well of this community and this region and the economic stability that we saw prior. And like I said, the FAA is still continuing to see that in the forecasting of the future for our aviation use. And something, that we were looking at too, with COVID, the confidence of consumers in airline travel has gone down. And so business category aircraft and usage is actually expected to be picked up a little bit more as corporations may potentially fly out their employees on private or charter aircraft instead of airline service. So we're looking at different ways that we're seeing ways that we'll be combating the onset of COVID, as our airports is quite different from Logan and airline service airports, in which we receive different types of revenues.
Okay. So just so I understand, I gather you're saying that there is more use by airplanes. It's not necessarily more physical facilities being built at the airport. It's more traffic use in terms of in corporate businesses generally.
So yeah, in terms of actual operations, but we were also we did bring on the additional businesses and services that could accommodate the higher use.
On-site.
Yes.
Okay. Oh,
yeah. So it was
okay.
a mixture. A mixture of all of it.
Yeah. Thank you. And secondly, just sort of, it's mostly a yes/no question. Does the airport operation get COVID-19 federal funds?
Yes, we did not include that in the fund balance. We received $69,000 for the CARES Act directly for our operations, and so as we need, we will be expending invoices out, and that, like I said, that has not been included in our budget, and it acts differently from our regular grants, similar but different in the fact that we can use it directly into our operations.
Okay, thank you. So it's an operation expense that's been filled in, if you will. And then the last is I would welcome because this is the budget hearing, I don't want to get in depth in it at all, but just sort of a status update on the PFAS testing. Is it getting close to a conclusion with having an assessment report, or is it still some distance from that? Where does that testing stand at this point?
So currently, the testing is actually still ongoing right now. Okay. So yeah, as far as this past week and last week, I know that the company, the individuals from the company were actually out on the airfield in various parts around the airport, still monitoring and getting the test wells that they need. So.
And was that work going on during sort of this 2 or 3 month shutdown period, or did they have to suspend operations then?
No, we had to do it more carefully, just in terms of our own staff coordination, because those staffs that company and those staff, they would need an escort out to the field. So those conversations were still ongoing during COVID. It was just a little bit more coordination between how to keep our staff safe as well as them.
Okay. Those are my 3 questions, Mr. President. Thank you, Ms. Bullion. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you, Ms. Bullion. We look forward to hearing from you again in the fall, or maybe even before. Mr. Ailes, you're good with that budget. The last thing we need to talk about is the golf and tennis, I think, Mr. Ailes.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. President. And thanks, Ms. Bullion, for that. I appreciate it. The Golf and Tennis Enterprise Fund is one of our most straightforward. It's overseen by the Golf Commission. Mr. Loud, whom you're all familiar with, I'm sure, is the chair of that. And we work very closely with him on a regular basis to not only establish and monitor this budget, but effectively oversee the management and the contractual agreement that we have with Golf Facilities Management Incorporated, GFMI, who currently holds the management contract for the Golf and Tennis Club. So the budget is pretty straightforward. It's a $380,000 budget, which is the amount spelled out within the contractual agreement with GFMI, and they will effectively, over the course of FY21, pay us that amount for the rights to run the golf course and retain fees associated with golfing. As you know, there is a clubhouse on site. There is a golf course. There's tennis facilities as well. And so most of the costs you see associated with the operations there involve some sort of maintenance or debt associated with long-term improvements on some of the facilities. I'll stop there because I know it's starting to get late, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, just to make a comment, I was lucky enough to play last Friday. The place is in great shape, and they've made the social distancing part of your experience there very manageable. So they're doing a good job and doing the things that they're supposed to do. Councilor Houseman has a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Ailes, during the lockdown, during the shutdown, I know the golf course was not available. But I've been reading in the business news recently that given the nature of the activity and the sort of the opening up, that the golf courses are actually seeing sort of a resurgence of activity. On balance, what's happening with the revenues and how do you sort of see them going forward at the golf course?
Yeah, so the revenues in terms of our contractual agreement is set within the contract. So
Right.
the management company is on the hook, if you will, for lack of a better term, to provide us with that revenue every year. So in terms of an enterprise fund, there's not a tremendous amount of risk in FY21.
Yeah, I'm sort of looking behind ours to the sort of the underlying contractual issues that the vendor has.
Sure. So you also have before you a request for a fund balance draw in FY20, which we will hopefully have a public hearing on this coming Monday. That's specifically related to your question, Counselor, in that we did see some delays in membership fees being paid through the management company, and they lost basically entire months worth of greens fees, which tend to be the primary surge of revenue that they receive over the course of a year. So we have seen a dip off in that. The other impact that we're seeing now that they've reopened is, yes, you're correct, every slot's probably filled on a day-to-day basis as long as it's not pouring out. However, the amount of rounds that they can fit into a day has effectively got cut in half. So they're not receiving as much in terms of revenue in that regard either. There is an impact. We are working through some of the financial aspects to it. There are some contractual clauses that we're trying to work through, both them and us and our legal department to try to help them through this in a way that can support them as a business, because frankly, they've been a tremendous partner. There's that word again, tremendous, but they've been a great partner over the years and really bringing that course up to a high quality standard, as President Guanci mentioned. And they're someone that we want to be successful in the long run. So we know it's having an impact. We're trying to work with them for the FY20 stuff, but we don't see any impact in FY21 in terms of the revenue they'll be able to provide us at this point.
Okay, thank you. I know we'll have more discussion about it on Monday. So thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilor Houseman. Anybody else? All right then. Thanks to everybody for being here tonight. Mr. Ailes, you're always top notch. Mayor Cahill, thank you for being here the whole time. Special thanks to Dr. Chirocek and Mike Collins, Gloria Bouillon for coming and presenting. Our next business is city councilors. We will have a regular city council meeting on Monday, June 15th at 7 p.m. We have 4 public hearings. It's a busy night. We have a few public speakers. And then on Thursday, the 18th at 7 p.m., we'll have the public hearing for the FY21 budget. We'll talk about that on Monday. Council Flaherty, would you like to adjourn Finance and Property?
Yes. Yes, I'd like to join Finance and Property. Do I hear a roll call
Ms. Kent?
for adjournment?
So moved. Flaherty?
Roll call.
Roll call,
Just
right?
3 of us. Yeah.
Yeah, Flaherty?
Yes.
Rand? Yes. Guanci?
Yes, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole.
So moved.
So moved. Councilor
Second.
Houseman, second.
Okay, I love everybody's enthusiasm tonight at 9 o'clock. Roll call, Ms. Kent.
Yes.
Flowers,
Yes.
Frady's,
Yes.
Houseman,
Yes.
Rand. Yes. Rotundo
Yes.
and Guanci.
Yes, thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you on Monday night.
See you on
Thank you.
Monday. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
See you Monday.
Thank you.